Welcome everyone to Ask TLC, Finding Peace and Contentment. And we are so happy to have today Dr. Karen Haskell and Dr. Terri Devine. Both of them are doctors of education, and they're going to be talking about this subject for us today. We're so pleased they're here to do this. So I will turn it over to you, Terri.
Good morning. I'm Terri Devine, Dr. Terri Devine, and my friend Karen and I, we're going to talk to you today about how to find more peace and contentment in your life as you age. What we notice is that starting when we're very young, we are receiving messages from all over, and it's very difficult to understand those messages when we're very young, but they are in us and staying with us. And Karen is going to talk to you a little bit about how that you need to think about those messages. And if you don't, they stay with you. So Karen, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Terri. I'm Karen Haskell. You may have been surprised with a title about contentment and peace, that we're not talking about yoga and we're not talking about meditation. We're actually talking about your interaction with yourself and others, and the messages that Terri was talking about, because you have been a work in progress your entire life. You've been learning and changing and adapting. But where did your personality come from? Your interaction with yourself and others. Well, scientists for decades have been arguing about whether nature, your genes, or nurture, your environment, which one controls you. Well, before birth, nature, your genes, they're the ones that are influencing and controlling some of your characteristics. For instance, eye color or skin color is definitely determined by your genes. But they're discovering other genes that influence things like openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and a thing called neuroticism, which is a reaction to stress. But from birth, the nurture or the environment begins to have an impact. Your experiences, mainly from your parents, influence you, your view of the world, and people. And here come the messages that Terri was talking about. You're my perfect little girl. Don't be so careless. Be more like your brother. You're so pretty when you smile. Oh, you are my little princess. Well, imagine when you were 0 to 5 years old, just a tiny little thing with no experience except your parents and maybe some relatives. Your parents' words were powerful. After all, they loved you and they were the most important people in your life. You believed what they said. But let's remember that this is your parents' view of you, and it's not necessarily accurate. You know, their view of the world was passed on by their parents, and that may not have been accurate. So little Susie has a great relationship with her mom. They love one another. Susie feels supported and loved. One day, mom comes back from work. Mom has had a tough day, and she's not in a very good mood. All she wants is peace and quiet. She opens the door, and there is Susie singing at the top of her lungs because Susie's happy. And mom says, Susie, why do you always have to sing at the top of your lungs? Well, Terri, what does that do to Susie?
Well, Susie, because she doesn't have experience and she doesn't understand, believes that she shouldn't be singing because her mother didn't like it. And that's what happens when we're little. And these messages come into us, and we don't have the ability or the knowledge or even the sense of communication to understand them. But we know the feelings. We're born being little things that feel everything. And the perfect picture of that is when children are teething and they're crying their heart out because they hurt and they don't know how to explain it to us. One of the things that I have learned along the way that I think is very significant is what I call that still small voice inside of you. I believe when we're born, that still small voice is what starts in us. And it gives us messages. It repeats the things we've heard at first because we don't have language. But eventually, when you hear that voice, you begin to hear your own voice. You begin to hear either, yes, my mother's right, or no, that's not so accurate. And generally about teenage, when kids are so self-involved, when they're teenagers, they start thinking about everything and what everybody thinks of them. And they start thinking, wait a minute, my father told me that I was clumsy, but my gym teacher said I should try out for the football team. And that is incongruent, but they don't know that word. It just doesn't add up to them. And so they begin to question what those things, those messages that we've heard are what they mean to us in our life. And that still small voice is with us all through our lives. I imagine any one of you can think about it for a moment and notice that while you're driving in the car, or whether you're standing in the line at Publix, there's a whole conversation that goes on inside your head. And for some of you, it's a very negative conversation because you're still believing the things that were said about you. That small voice is the voice that will help you say, is that true? Is that not true? What can I do about it? That voice wants the best for you. That voice wants you to figure it out. If you listen to that voice and understand that the voice inside of you will be with you from when you take your first breath until when you take your last. So my message to you about that voice is to trust it. How many times along the way have we been told, trust your gut? Well, that gut is that still small voice. And my message is you need to make friends with that voice. You know, some of the people in the groups that I've done over the years will say, well, I hear them say bad things. Well, then tell them to shut up. You are that still small voice. You get a chance to figure out through listening to that voice whether or not you are finding the peace and the contentment that you need. Karen, what do you think about that?
Well, you've been talking about your relationship with yourself, Terri.
Yes.
But what about, we live in a bigger world. So let us bring other people into the picture. What is your relationship with them? Well, we have different levels of interaction, closeness, intimacy with people in our lives. We have our close friends, our partners. They know all about us and we know all about them. The second category I would call acquaintances. All those people in our lives, our golf buddies and the people you see in church and the neighbors, you know a little bit about them and they know a little bit about you. But the third category, which I'm going to call minute interactions or micro interactions, those are 10 seconds, maybe to 5 minutes, are the people that pass through your lives. They're probably strangers. And the interesting thing is when we were all so frustrated during COVID, climbing the walls, even though by phone and Zoom, we were seeing our close friends or talking to them and our acquaintances, but we were climbing the walls. And that's our third idea of relationships, the micro interactions. We had no contact moment by moment or for a 30-minute conversation with a stranger. And the interesting thing about this category, which we give so little attention to, is that those small contacts actually connect us to the larger world and make us feel a part of it. In that moment, that quick moment of interaction, you see that stranger and they see you. What would be some examples? Well, the deli line or bumping into somebody or crossing paths with a woman who's walking towards you and gosh, she looks great. These are all opportunities for you to have one of those micro interactions. Now, there's little risk in trying one of these. You say something, the person frowns. Oops, that didn't go well, but who cares? Because this is a stranger. You made the effort to connect. But most people respond. We love to be noticed. We love to be acknowledged. We don't like to be in a crowd, moving through the grocery aisles or walking down the street by ourselves. Even though we see other people, there is no connection. So when you reach out and do these little connections, they feel good. They're seen, and you feel good because they see you back with a smile. Research tells us that social interaction makes us live longer and healthier. Now, we've all known that. That's why we have friends. But making eye contact, high-fiving someone, shaking someone's hand, these little communications lowers your stress hormone and releases your happy hormone. So here's an example. You talked about being in a Publix line, Terri, so I'll carry on with that. You're in a line, it's long, and you have an appointment and you are stressed out beyond belief. Now, you could continue to be stressed out, looking at your watch. You go through the line, you're probably not very pleasant with the poor cashier, and you go on your way in a bad mood. You have a choice here because you have thought you're isolated in this whole experience. So you look around yourself and you see what's in people's carriages, and you see, oh, a birthday cake in somebody's. There's a wonderful opportunity to just say, wow, you got a birthday somewhere in your family, and they will probably respond. Or you see another carriage where there's a frozen food product, and you always wanted to try that. And so you say, wow, I noticed this frozen food thing in your carriage. I've always wanted to try it. How is it? They will respond. This could be 5 seconds. It could move into a 3-minute conversation. But now you have connected. The time goes by. When it's your turn with the cashier, you're feeling much better because you're not alone in this awful situation. You leave, and the rest of the day you're feeling better. You recognize that person, and they recognized you in return. It's a habit we can initiate and cultivate. So, Terri, where's the peace in all of this?
I think the peace comes from being in the world, listening to that still small voice, and being able to accept who we are with all our bumps and our bruises, and recognizing that being in the world around the people around us, that, most of us are 70 or a little bit older. I haven't found a perfect person my entire life. So we begin to understand that we are not alone in the world, and we can be accepted with all of our foibles. The important thing is that when we're looking for contentment and peace, that we accept and love ourselves first. It's very difficult to give out love if you don't know what it is inside first. After that, one of the things I often tell my clients is, when you get up in the morning and you're brushing your teeth, look in that mirror. If you're not happy with what's there, get some help with it. If you can look in the mirror and say, well, it's another day and I'm doing okay, then you are in the middle of peace and contentment. We don't feel it all the time, but if we can feel it in that moment in the mirror in the morning, we usually have a much better day. I think these things are so important because we're not young anymore, most of us. We've gained so much knowledge and information, and we need to acknowledge the goodness inside of us. There's one more part to what we talked about today, though, and it's being of service to others. We've talked all about how we are when we're little and how we examine from the inside out how our life is. It seems to me that a fulfilled, complete life needs to have a piece where you recognize being in the world, you got to make it a little better. And you don't have to do major things. You can pick up the neighbor's newspaper and give it to the neighbor. That's a very nice thing to do. You can put a little in extra at church. You can join a club that has a goal to make the world a little better. There are so many ways for us to be of service. And being of service, it almost completes that picture. When we're looking in the mirror in the morning, when we're brushing our teeth, we could say, well, yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing okay. If you don't have these things and you're frustrated about it, what I say to you is get some help. That's what we're all here for. And we're old enough to recognize that it isn't a bad thing anymore. Otherwise, you need to be happy that we're here and that we're brushing our teeth and we've got another day to look forward to. So with that, I turn it back to my friend.
You know, Terri, I'm thinking that your idea of service actually expands what I was talking about with micro interactions. If you pick up somebody's paper and they're at the door and you hand it to them, there's a micro interaction.
Absolutely.
So you just kind of expanded that idea.
That's right.
Which I think is terrific. Well, I want to talk about gratitude because I think that's the key to an awful lot of things. You know, life in the villages is great. We've got friends, activities, a nice house. We take these for granted. We say, well, that's just life in the villages. And when we just take it for granted, we lose out on the joy of actually appreciating things. And we lose out on the contentment. How many people in the world live in a place like we do called the villages? And it's not about money. Have you run into a very wealthy person, big house? You may even be envious about it, but they're kind of grumpy. Or you run into someone who doesn't have a lot of money and they're happy. Well, the grumpy one wants more out of life. They want, or they want more service. The cleaning lady missed a spot. The pool man didn't come on time. They want a bigger car. Well, that's not contentment. But the person with little money says, I've got my children and they love me. I'm part of a neighborhood and we get together all the time. So in one case, one person is grateful and that equals contentment. The other person is not. They say, I need more. There's a phrase, when enough is enough. That's gratitude. You don't need anything. And it can be gratitude for your life as a big picture. It can be gratitude in the moment that you have a mini interaction. The moment that you say, oh, I really so appreciate life in the villages. That's a moment to be grateful for. So how do we expand our sense of gratitude? Well, this is going to sound funny in the villages, but you have to slow down. And we know life in the villages is moving from one activity to another, and it's fun. But we're missing out on the pleasure of those moments deep down. So slow down and look for the small moment, the first cup of coffee in the morning. Oh, that feels so good. It's your first interaction with the world, and it kind of wakes you up and makes you alert. You take that cup of coffee into your sunroom and you look out. Oh, the puffy clouds are just beautiful. This is a moment to be grateful for. So the small pleasures, as well as the large pleasures, are to be grateful for. But we need to use the language. If you say that cup of coffee is nice, well, that's kind of keeping that cup of coffee and the pleasure at a distance from you. But if you say, I am so grateful that every morning I can wake up and have a cup of coffee, that brings it into your soul and your heart. And that's when you feel it. And that's when your sense of contentment and peace occurs. So you need to move like to grateful. You have lunch with your best friend, you walk away and you say, gosh, she's nice and I always enjoy those lunches. Well, that's still a little bit off. I am grateful that friend is in my life and I can have lunch with her. And maybe the last example is living in the moment. You can't change the past. You can't predict the future, but you can control the moment. With gratitude in your micro interactions, you can create your own contentment. Now, there's a concept that Terri taught me a couple of years ago. What you focus on grows. When she told me about that a couple of years ago, I simply did not understand it. But when, and this is such a concrete example, I went out and bought a new car, a green Camry. I got it because I like the color green, and I didn't see any green Camrys around in the villages. So I thought, well, that'll make me a little unique. I got in the first day and I started driving around the villages. Oh, there's a green Camry. Oh, so there are two of us. The next day I go out. Oh, there are a couple of more Camrys. Well, by the end of the week, I wasn't unique at all. There were lots of green Camrys. And another example, my friend bought one of those little bright green cars. I didn't think there were very many of those. And so when I would say little green car, I was sure it was my friend. Do you know how many little green cars there are? So what you focus on, what you notice, what you pay attention to grows. So if you're walking down the street and you see someone beautifully dressed and you comment on it, you just say to them, this stranger, gosh, you look great today. One of those little micro interactions. And she responds with, oh, thank you. Okay, that's one. The second day you're walking down, gosh, there's another really well-dressed person. So suddenly your focus is on something that gives you pleasure, but them as well. And so those little initiations that you take, those little mini micro conversations also come back and give you the contentment. But it also means in the future, because that was a positive interaction, you're going to initiate more often, you're going to feel better more often, and you're going to do it more and more. I have noticed that when people's responded, I feel great. I belong to the world at that moment, and I am grateful for it. I am not by myself making my way through the world. And now I do it many times a day. I feel grateful to be connected to others, and I help them feel connected. I control my world using micro interactions and gratitude, and that brings peace and contentment into my life. So, Terri, how are we going to sum this up?
Well, I think that one of the ways that we can sum it up is to remind people that we're talking to you about change, and changing is difficult. In fact, changing is so difficult that when I was in doctor school, I learned that when you want to change your behavior, and I'll give you an example. Say you have a sister that always puts you down, and you fight with her, but that doesn't work. She's still putting you down, and you want to change that behavior. If you don't know exactly what you're going to say to her, you only have 50 or 15 seconds to change the behavior. You must have an idea in your mind of what you're going to say to her. That's where that still small voice comes in. You can rehearse with that still small voice because you really need to. 15 seconds is all you have, and then you'll have the same argument you always had in the same way that you always had it, because you're in a rut. You're in a process a loop that keeps going round and round. And we want to, obviously, because we're here today, get more out of our life. We want to change it. We want to make it better. We really do want to find that peace and contentment. I really hope that we've helped you in some way do that. Karen?
I'm just thinking the beauty of all this is that we control it.
That's right.
We just need to figure out a mechanism, and you and I have talked about that, Terry. Some offered some possible ways of doing that, but we control it. And isn't that a wonderful way? I kind of feel contented knowing that.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, everyone, and go off and may peace and contentment become a part of your life.